Good morning. Welcome to our service at Beaumaris-Mordialloc Baptist Church. As most of you know, my name is Judy and I'm going to be leading the service for today. And Pastor Tom is going to be bringing us the message. Now, in the past week, my well-ordered life has really been turned upside down. I have a 2-year-old in the house, together with his mother. The mother's no problem. The 2-year-old is delightful. I've spent a lot of the time on the carpet with Thomas the Tank and friends, having the most wonderful, unscripted adventures. But something that's becoming quite obvious at this stage in life, at some point we need to start talking about rules. And obviously a key one for us is that we've just got a new dog, and now the 2-year-old arrives. So, rules like, don't annoy the dog. And I was thinking how often, we do sort of push against rules, but they're so important. Could you imagine driving if we didn't have road rules? How would we be if we didn't have rules about paying tax? And it's very interesting that rules are so important. And when God created us, he realized that we needed rules too. And so Pastor Tom is going to be talking about God's rules for life.
I searched the world, but it couldn't fill me. Man's empty praise, treasures that fade are never enough. Then you came along and put me back together. Every desire is now satisfied.
We're going to have a time of prayer together. And for our time of prayer, we're going to draw on the writings of Psalm 29 and a lovely prayer by Michelle Quast. Let's pray. Ascribe to the Lord, you heavenly beings. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Worship the Lord in the splendor of his holiness. The voice of the Lord is over the waters. The God of glory thunders. The Lord thunders over the mighty waters. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is majestic. As we look at the wars, the turmoil, the injustice, and lies in the world around us, we feel discouraged. May we perceive the hidden significance in our current circumstances and be wise. Help us to trust that you have a bigger plan which we cannot see, but we will one day understand. Lord, today we ask your forgiveness for the places that will remain empty in your vineyard, for needs that were created artificially, for talents that will never be developed, for the countless workers, your children, who will be deprived of the development that you want them to have, for our own lack of fervor in trying to find out what you want of us, and for our lack of generosity in neglecting to try as hard as we can to be what you want us to be. Lord, we thank you for the talents you've given us, for physical and intellectual gifts we've received, for the education we've received, for the opportunities we have to choose what we want to do in life. We pray for your church, which faces persecution in so many countries, for those who've decided to follow you, but fear reprisals from their family and those around them. We pray that you'll give them your peace, courage, and the ability to show love in adversity. We ask that their needs will be provided for, that they will draw others to you. We pray for those in our congregation who are ill. We pray for Betty and for others, and we pray for Lindsay as he recovers further. And thank you for the amazing medical facilities that we have that can intervene to help. We pray today for our outreach partners in the Pacific, the Bangladesh, and locally, that they will be encouraged in their work and able to build enduring relationships with those around them. We ask for wisdom for Anthony and family and their endeavors. May these be blessed and of benefit to the community. We remember the work of Nates, sports chaplains around Australia, and those interceding on behalf of Christians persecuted for their beliefs. We pray for the world around us as truth is increasingly buried by fake news and lies. Give us your wisdom to be able to discern truth from lies, to be discerning in what we read and believe, to make an effort to find the truth so that we may be recognized as people of wisdom, integrity, and courage. We end with the words of Michelle Quast. Lord, let us be like putty in your hands. Let us accept your guidance through events so that, conscious of the real needs of others, we may discover where you are waiting for us and the part you want us to play through our work in the completion of your creation. Amen. Our Bible reading comes from Mark chapter 12, verses 28 to 34, the greatest commandment. One of the teachers of the law came and heard them debating. Noticing that Jesus had given them a good answer, he asked him, of all the commandments, which is the most important? The most important one, answered Jesus, is this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. The second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. Well said, teacher, the man replied. You are right in saying that God is one and there is no other but him. To love him with all your heart, with all your understanding, and with all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself is more important than all burnt offerings and sacrifices. When Jesus saw that he had answered wisely, he said to him, You are not far from the kingdom of God. And from then on, no one dared ask him any more questions. May God add his blessing to his word.
Awesome. So before we get into the message this week, I do have a few things that would like to highlight for you and make you aware of, just in case you weren't. Firstly, and perhaps most excitedly for some people here, if your primary school age children and lower aren't in a program at the moment, now might be a really good time to send them out. They are operating this week, which is pretty good. Another thing we'd like to highlight for you as well, that Pastors Michelle and David are away again this week, getting some much needed relaxation and rest over having not really had too much over the last couple of years. So they're catching up on that. They will be back next Sunday, but up until that point, we do ask that any pastoral matters or concerns be brought to Gwen Austin, particularly myself, or the Connecting and Caring team leaders, which is Miriam, Christy, or Alison. Also, again, I want to highlight as well that after the service today, we'll have a time of connecting with each other. If you want to join us, if you're in person at least anyway. And as a part of that, we do have barista coffee, which you can get as long as you go grab a coffee card from the Next Steps area, which is next to the doors that lead outside. So you can go there first and then head over to the counter. Otherwise, if you don't want a barista coffee, there is coffee and tea in the back hall as well that you're welcome to grab anytime, really. We also do have a few remnants of COVID safety around, just because we thought they were good things and we've kept them on. So we do encourage you to do your giving online where possible. But if you are in person, there is also a COVID safe giving option of an offering box in the foyer. The last thing I wanted to also highlight was next week is our Mother's Day service. Which is an exciting time, and it will be a service where some kids will be able to participate in the service as well, where we get to celebrate not just mothers but women throughout our lives that play important roles, whatever that title might be. But we like celebrating all women and all the ways that they help shape and form our lives. So that's it. We're going to do a little bit of a prayer now, just for the message and for the offering as well, and then we'll get stuck into it. Sound good? Alrighty. Dear Lord, thank you so much for today that we can come together in community. We ask that you bless our offering and our tithes to you, that as we respond in faithfulness to your faithfulness, that you'll use our resources of time and money to bless others, that we may be a blessing, we may be blessed to be a blessing to others. We ask that you also today open up our hearts and minds to whatever your word is for us individually, but also as a whole. We ask that you come into this space, join with us, be together with us. In Jesus' name, amen. Awesome. So, a lot of you may not know much about my childhood. I don't think I've talked about it too much in the wider community, but it was a bit of an interesting childhood. And one of the ways it was interesting was that for many of my formative years, from roughly 2-ish to about 10, I lived in 3 different households at the same time. So during the week, I lived in one household, and then every weekend I alternated between 2 different other households. And that was kind of an interesting way to live, a bit of a challenging way to live. And one of those ways it was challenging was around rules, because every household has rules, and every household has different rules. So living in 3 at the same time meant that I had 3 sets of rules at kind of any given moment that would be running through my mind in any situation. And that became a challenge. For example, around bedtime, I'm sure the person, one household, had a fairly strict bedtime, which was probably a good thing, looking back on it. Another household, less so, but a good idea of when I should be going to bed. And another household, I had no bedtime whatsoever. I could stay up until I passed out on the couch or whatever. And obviously, it's quite young. But what that meant, as I was going through those different households, was that I became somewhat resentful of the stricter rules because I felt restricted on a way of living that I'd felt comfortable with and used to. They felt like they limited my options of what I could and couldn't choose. And I think that it was particularly so in the sense of, for a lot of these rules, I didn't necessarily see the negative outcome of what they were trying to protect me from. So for bedtimes, you get tired in the morning, you're probably a bit grumpy, but I probably wouldn't have blamed it on bedtime, or probably would have blamed it on someone else, really, right? Which means I didn't understand the value of that rule in my life. And so I became resentful about how it was restricting me. And it got to the point where I found it very difficult to listen to people of authority. Particularly as I was growing up as a teenager, I struggled with authority and people who would like to set rules or, in my opinion, restrictions on me and what my options were. Even to the point where, as I was growing up, if you said for me to do something and I felt like it was more of a demand than a request, I could often just decide to do the exact opposite, no matter what it was, because I wanted to show you and myself that I wasn't restricted. Because that was really, really important to me at the time. And this feeling of being restricted and struggling with authority bled into my relationship with God too as a teenager, because it felt like there was rules around how I was supposed to act and behave if I was to follow God and follow Jesus. And that made it very difficult. It made it difficult to connect with other Christians at times, but it made it difficult to connect with a God that I felt like was trying to keep me in a box and restrict me, and instead of giving me freedom. And that made it really, really hard. And I think for a lot of us as well, that difficulty is something that we experience in life. So maybe for you, you're checking out Christianity and you're wondering about all these different rules that you might come across, and it feels like there's these rules that are restricting you from having a full life, to having this half life where you can only do certain things and be happy in certain ways and that sort of thing. Or maybe you are a Christian, you've had a friend say something similar to what I've just described, that why would you follow this religion that doesn't allow you to be happy or makes you do certain things in a certain way. Or maybe even as you follow Jesus, you kind of feel this somewhat as you go through your journey, that there's these certain rules and expectations on you, and that you can't even really live up to most of them anyway. So instead of just feeling restricted, you feel restricted and guilty about it all. And there's this voice in your head that says you're not good enough and you're never going to be. And it can be really, really hard with these rules of religion, right? These rules of God. So, what we're going to do today is we're going to have a look at the Bible, because when we bump into these sort of thoughts and ideas, it's really important that we look at what the Bible has to say and our thoughts about them and our preconceived ideas, and whether they've missed the mark or whether they're completely supported by what the Bible says, and see how that actually impacts into our lives. So we're going to reread the Bible verses from today and draw some notes out of it. But first, I always like giving context to where we're at in the Bible. So we're going to give some context here. So we're in the Gospel of Mark. The Gospels are a biography of Jesus with different perspectives. This perspective is from a guy called Mark, surprisingly. And Mark was the interpreter of an apostle called Peter, who was a very, very close friend of Jesus. So out of the 12, he was actually one of the closest as well. So Mark gets his stories of Jesus from Peter and their time together. So Mark didn't necessarily know all these stories personally, or wasn't there to experience all these stories personally. And where we're at in the Gospel of Mark is in what's called the Passion Week, or the week where Jesus is about to be crucified. So he is kind of in the middle of that week. So he's a couple of days away from being crucified, but he's also already entered Jerusalem on Palm Sunday in triumphant glory. And then what he does after that, he goes to the temple, actually, and he cleanses it. He kicks out all these scam artists that were running some, and all these different evil things that they were doing there. So the money exchanges, kind of giving incorrect money and things like that. So he goes and cleanses the temple. And in doing so, he angers these religious leaders who were benefiting from those scams, who were getting either more power or more money, whatever it may have been, by allowing these things to happen. And in their anger, they decide that they need to get rid of Jesus. He needs to go, and so their grand idea, or the grand plan in how to get rid of Jesus, is to trap him in his words, in what he says, so that he may become less popular with the people. That way, if they were to kill him, they wouldn't get in trouble. And so this is what they set out to do. And they do it 3 times in the Gospel of Mark. And before we get to our Bible verse, they've already tried 2 questions, which is kind of the context to the very first verse there. And 2 of those questions were quite deep theological type questions in a sense, but Jesus answers really well. He outmaneuvers them in a sense with his words, while still being honest and forthright and uncompromising, which angers them. They realize that they've been outwitted and they're frustrated. And then, obviously, in the first, in where we're at, then one singular person asks another third question on top of it. So we'll begin in Mark chapter 12, verse 28. And it says, one of the teachers of the law came and heard them debating. Noticing that Jesus had given them a good answer, he asked, of all the commandments, which is the most important? And the teacher of the law here is a type of expert, but a teacher probably doesn't give quite enough context to it. He's a bit more than a teacher. He's almost an attorney of God's law. He's able to interpret it and give applications for it for the everyday person, or at least remind people what the previously agreed upon application would be. So a teacher is maybe not the right word for our context or our understanding, but it's a bit more. He then asks a question, which is actually quite a common question given to rabbis at the time, which is, what is the greatest commandment? And it was a question that was often used to measure up that rabbi, of how they responded. Were they good enough to follow, or were they just not really worth listening to? And so this is an important question for not just this person, but the whole culture at the time as well. We also see that this particular teacher of the law is actually quite impressed with Jesus' answers previously. He was almost coming around from not liking Jesus to being impressed and maybe even deciding to follow Jesus after this moment. And this is his last kind of test. This is his be-all and end-all question. So it is a more positive interaction than the previous ones. And we continue in verse 29. The most important one, answered Jesus, is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. So Jesus doesn't just answer the question at face value. He kind of gives a bit of an answer plus a bit extra. He gives the first most important commandment and the second as well, because they're so closely related. They're both essential to the kingdom of God and to Jesus. The first part of the answer would be familiar to any Jew at this time as well, who had studied the law anyway. And or was participating in religious activity. It's called the Shema, is the first part of this, which is the start of the prayer that every Jew had to recite morning and evening. That the Lord, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. That's part of that. And so it describes both who God is, but also his unity and relationship with himself. And then it goes into describing the way in which we are to love God. And it's not with just our hearts and our emotional type love. It's a bit more than that. It's with everything we have, with our soul, with our mind, and with our strength. It's a love that requires more than just what we feel, but a decision constantly that is deep within us and that will take strength from us to pursue. And then he says, love your neighbor as yourself, which again is easier said than done. It's something that's going to take a bit more than what you potentially think at face value. In verse 32, it says, well said, teacher, the man replied, you're right in saying that God is one and there is no other but him. To love him with all your heart, with all your understanding, and with all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself is more important than all burnt offerings and sacrifice. We could have expected the teacher of the law to argue with him here. Maybe even say, Jesus, I was talking about commandments, about the laws, not the relationships that I have. But still, instead of that, he agrees with him and then offers us an extra insight into this whole concept. That these commandments are more important to God than any offering or sacrifice. Any behavioral change is redundant, essentially, without an internal change of the way you love people. In verse 34, it finishes off, when Jesus saw that he had answered wisely, he said to him, you are not far from the kingdom of God, and from then on no one dared ask him any more questions. So this completes the questioning story. Jesus has completely, essentially shown himself as worthy. There's no arguing with it anymore. There's no way for them to come back from it. So, we can gain a few insights from this interaction on God's rules for life. But first, I think we should examine some rules or laws in the Bible. And so I think it's important that we begin with maybe the most common that everyone's heard of, the Ten Commandments, right? And these 10 commandments can be found in Exodus, found in chapter 20. And they describe specific ways to live, such as you shall have no other God before me, or honor your mother and father. An important one, you shall not murder. So if we could follow that one today, that would be good. Right, but we laugh at the idea of following that one because it seems so easy and simple to us. It's something that I reckon, hopefully, most of us would agree that would be able to follow today and probably the rest of the week and maybe even the rest of the year. But there's a bit more to it than that. It feels like there's something missing, though, doesn't it, when we think about it? That surely that's not it. That's not everything God has from us, because there's a feeling within us when we reflect on our relationship with God that doesn't capture everything. And for the Jewish people of Jesus' time, that was true as well. In fact, they decided that there was over 600 rules and laws to follow in following God and Jesus, or the Word of God. There was over 600, and 365 of those were negative, so things not to do, and over 200 were positive, things that you ought to do. And so even for them, it was very confusing. It was very hard, and it's hard and confusing for us. There was more things to focus on than there was days in the year for them. They couldn't even just choose one rule or law to focus on per day and manage to do it in a year. It was too much. And I think we feel like that too, that there's so many rules and laws when we're following God and we don't even know half of them. And we feel like we just can't do it. So what do we do in that space? Well, the Jews of the time did a similar thing to what I reckon we do these days. They said, well, which ones are the greater laws? Which ones are the lighter ones? Which ones, if I can't follow all of them, maybe I can figure out which ones are the better ones, the bigger ones that impact me most, and I'll just follow those ones instead. Because then surely if I miss a couple of the lighter ones, it kind of outweighs in the end. And I feel like we do this too, right? We go, well, I don't murder anyone, so it's fine that I might lie every now and again. You know what I mean? Like the impact, and we weigh up the impact on ourselves and other people, and they did too. But the problem with that is the people of Israel at the time also realized this. They couldn't even follow that. They couldn't even manage to follow that as a group of people, but potentially even individually. So what did they do again? They tried to sum it down even further, which is the greatest commandment. Give me just one. Maybe if it's just one thing, I'll be able to do that well for the rest of my life. And so that's why it became an impressive, or a much debated and talked about question, which is the greatest commandment. And that's why it's asked of Jesus in this time too. Sorry, just lost where I was. So if we look at what Jesus' response is, it becomes quite evident that it's not necessarily a behavioural thing, much to our disappointment. That what the greatest commandment is, if we were to make and force God to choose one, what the greatest commandment is not a specific clothing item to wear. It's not a specific behaviour. It's too big for that. It's not that simple, and it's not that easy, really. Instead, it is to love, and to love more than what we feel capable of, to love not just with our emotions and our feelings at the moment, but to make a decision to love. To when we don't feel like it, when we're frustrated at our parents for telling us not to do something, or when we're feeling frustrated at our kids for not following it, whatever it may be, that it's still a decision that we have to make, and we're being asked to make if we're to follow God's rules for life. It's something that requires our inner being and our inner strength. It's something that takes effort. It's not easy, but it is something that we're asked to do. But how do we do it? In a practical sense, how do we love others and God well? Because I can talk about this vague concept of loving others, loving God, and you could go home and be like, oh, that might have sounded good, but I don't really know what to do. But that's the whole beauty of the thing. There was 600 laws to follow in Israel at the time. And in some ways, they're still somewhat applicable to us. But if we change our thought pattern and our perspective on it, instead of 300 laws and restrictions to follow, there's 600 opportunities to love others and God well. God has already outlined for you many, many practical ways to love him and love others well. They're not there to restrict you. They're to give you an opportunity to love. So then why do we feel restricted? If there's an opportunity, why do we feel restricted? And like God is forcing us into some sort of slavery or something like that. And the answer is somewhat simple, but it's because our nature is to rebel, even if it's against a good thing. If I was to give you some rules to live by, and you, like I did as a kid, had someone else say, well, maybe you don't need to follow those ones, just follow this. Your nature would be to go with the easiest one. Our nature is to rebel against what is put on us, even if it is a good thing. Maybe even, especially if it's a good thing. The more complex answer for our relationship with God is because we don't necessarily trust God and believe that he wants to set us free. So we assume he's going to entrap us. We assume that he's here to restrict us. And so I have two quick counterpoints to that because we don't have all day to spend on it. But the first is actually in Exodus chapter 20, where we see the most important or most known rules of our relationship with God. In the Ten Commandments. There's a much skipped over verse. It's the first and second verse, really. But in the second verse of chapter 20, it says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. God reminds us before he asks us to do anything that he's a God of freedom. His whole purpose for us is to be free, to live a full life, not some half life. He wants us to be able to live well and good lives instead of being in slavery to people or to sin. He brings us out of slavery instead. And then he backs it up, because we don't always believe him at his word. He backs it up. He becomes man. He becomes Jesus Christ. And he decides that he's going to sacrifice himself to pay the price for our failure to live by rules that are designed to give us a good life. So we fail at it, and he lets us have another chance to have the freedom of choice of whether we want to love God or live outside of it. So, to sum up simply, God's rules for life are this: do the next thing in love. And it's as simple as that. So in that hope, in that light, here's my challenge for the week. You know, I like giving a challenge that we can do together. Every day this week, I would like you to do one thing in love for one other person. It can be the same person every day of the week. It doesn't have to be someone different each day, but I want you to do one thing in love as a conscious choice. And I'll promise it will take you a step closer to loving God. So if we do the second most important commandment, it will bring us closer to the most important commandment. So in those moments when you're frustrated, I want you to choose to love anyway, when you don't necessarily feel like loving. So once every day, here's an easy way to do it. Ask the question, what can I do in love right now? Whether it's for God or for another person, what can I do in love? And then do it. Choose to do it. And this is the type of thing that changes your life. It will change my life if you do it. It will change your kid's life. It will change your marriage. It will change your workplace, our church, and our community. Because when you start doing things in love, even when you don't want to, it changes everything, because it's God's love. And God's love changes everything. I guarantee it. If you do it, it will change something huge in your life this week. And change, hopefully, something huge if you continue to do it further than a week. So, let us end in prayer as we wrap up. Dear Lord, thank you so much that you chose to love us first. That you choose to continually be faithful and back up every promise you have ever made in our lives, that you choose to set us free and give us choice of freedom. We ask that you help us this week to choose love wherever we go and in whatever moments feel hardest. That we lean on your Spirit to give us the ability to do so, because we can't always do it ourselves. God, we ask that you move our hearts and our heads, as hard and as heavy as they can be, beyond what we are capable. That you love us so well, and that we recognize it, that we can love others too. We ask that you bring everything that you have for us in this message today into our week, so that we may change our lives, because your love changes everything. In Jesus' wonderful name, amen. And I believe we'll worship together again.
His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. The Lord bless you and keep you. Make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his
his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace.
May his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. May his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. May his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. May his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. May his presence go before you and behind you and beside you, all around you and within you. He is with you, he is with you in the morning, in the evening, in your coming and your going, in your weeping and rejoicing. He is for you, 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 he is for May his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. May his presence go before you and behind you and beside you, all around you and within you. He is with you, he is with you in the morning, in the evening, in your coming and your going, in your weeping and rejoicing. He is for you, he is for you.
Thank you, Tom, for your message, which is so pertinent to our lives. As usual, tea and coffee will be served. Great time to catch up with everybody. Now, also a reminder that there are going to be 1 or 2 people at the front, if you would like someone to pray with. Life is complex, and sometimes just being able to talk to someone about it and pray with them makes a huge difference. So do remember that, and don't feel shy about coming forward. Let's close with a benediction. May our ears ever be open to your voice, O God. May our hearts be obedient to your will. And may our feet ever be strong as we walk in your ways. Amen.